I want to welcome everyone to the Chat Mode Weekly Insights series that we've been running here. Where we share best practices, information, insights around chatbots and voice in the Microsoft ecosystem. So for everyone tuning in right now, welcome. Today we are very privileged to have Jonathan Foster of Microsoft. Jonathan is the Principal Content Experience Manager for Office+Edge, Mobile, and Content Intelligence. Jonathan leverages his years of experience in writing for film, television, theater, fiction, and UX writing to drive conversational user experience across conversational AI initiatives. John, thanks for being on the live stream today.
Thank you, Chad. This is awesome. This is my first time on.
Oh, very.
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of talks, but I've never been on the LinkedIn live feed. So this is awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. So for anyone building chatbots or voice-enabled solutions, conversational user experience is equally as important as, the AI models that power them. So can you share maybe a little bit more about your current role at Microsoft and what's your focus around conversational UX?
Yes. So my current role is I lead teams of writers in the areas that you mentioned, for example, Edge. The area called content intelligence is the part of my world that evolved out of the conversational UX, exploration in the early days to execution to becoming kind of at one point in time, kind of a unique, rare kind of expertise, right? So if you want, I can outline kind of my path in that, right?
So, yeah, sure. That sounds great.
Yeah. So because it kind of feeds into what the conversation could be, and just to give scope. So I came to Microsoft to lead writers in video for help content because I have a film and television background and a lot of video and stuff. And so I was an appealing candidate at that time. That was 12 years ago. Then I moved into UX writing, and my world was just blown apart because, that was for Xbox, and we were writing the experience and helping develop the experience for our users. And that was just wonderful. And I never looked back. But in 2013, I was tapped on the shoulder to do a project that was top secret at the time called Cortana. And that, for those of you that aren't familiar with Cortana, it was at the time there was only Siri, and Google had Google Now, which was not a personality-driven experience. It was just voice interactivity. So we wanted to have our opportunity to have Microsoft expression in that space. And so Cortana was a personality-driven. We made the decision early on to have a personality-driven experience. That means that it did have a sense of an entity involved, just like Siri does, right? And we were actually the second to market with that.
Oh, wow.
This was before Alexa. And then somewhere along the line, Google, who was very against at the time, at least in the writings that they would say they were against the personality, they switched and they created the Google Assistant, which has a robust, wonderful personality. I know some of the folks working on that, and they're wonderful people. We all get the importance of that, really. And so I worked for a long time, and I led that team. We went from 3 people to 30 people internationally. We made the choice, a very expensive choice internationally, to have writers in markets, the markets that we were expanding into, to interpret what the best personality and expression of the Cortana, experience would be. And then I discovered this opportunity. I thought, we've developed this personality, and I'm talking a lot about personality, and then we'll get back to more of the voice interaction model and why I'm a believer that personality helps. But it was the idea that, hey, if we could develop this personality for Cortana, which is proprietary, why don't we create a catalog of personalities for bot developers around the world? And that's exactly what we did. And so my focus was on that. And so the Cortana work left me. And primarily the reason I didn't want to go with the work was because I was invested in this other path, and I knew that I'd have to say goodbye to that. And so now, flash forward, working through Microsoft's bot framework team, we've created a catalog. It's basically a simple API that can be turned on. And we have 5 personalities, everything from the professional, it's very buttoned down, to the witty, we call them the comic, or it the comic, I should say. And also, for example, a very empathetic voice, more so than even the friendly voice, so that maybe that might work in healthcare or something like that. So we were listening to what our customers wanted, and we were trying to develop personalities that would be relevant for their needs. And it's in thousands and thousands of bots around the planet and continuing to grow. And then, so that was a focus of my team. Then my role expanded to include other kinds of UX writing. And so now what that conversational and personality development has evolved into is, along the way, we've learned the importance of what we identify now as inclusive language. So it's very critical that what we learned early on in the Cortana days was that certain people would say certain things that could be abusive behavior, racist behavior. It could be just pure insensitivity around a topic. And how do you respond to that? And so we gained a lot of expertise around how language can be used effectively, not only say in the UX, which is critical, but also in like what we're going to even respond to. And then how do you speak to that? Because in conversational environments, but as products become more, maybe they seem less conversational, but we think of it as a conversation where there's a back and forth, right? If you don't respond to something, that's a response. So once you go down the path, you don't have any choice. You have to have a response. Because if you skirt certain controversial or even abusive behavior, you end up condoning it in a very odd way. And we've done a lot of hard thinking around that. And that's why we've created these personalities, because packed in there, they have a bunch of queries that they respond to in a very strategic way. And if the company that's building the bot doesn't want to go down that path, they can edit it out. But we provide our expertise over years of doing this. So now we're evolving into how products, as we get into the world of AI-powered features, let's say, you have to be careful how you speak to a customer, right? Because the AI is picking up signals and putting out output to you that's a lot different. I call it, we're moving away from a static UX into something that's much more personal, and I dare say even intimate in some ways. Coaching opportunities, let's say, healthcare bots and stuff. If they're going to give you really intense advice, you got to be very clear that you're in control of the way that feels, because because that's the trust factor. So that's kind of how my path has evolved. And so, Chad, I'll toss it back to you for any questions around that. I can't hear you right now.
Sorry about that. I think I muted myself. I was just saying, no, that's a fascinating journey. So I think I probably use, and probably many people watching this live stream now probably have used some of the features that are, I think, in Q&A Maker plus in Lewis, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's where it is. It's bundled into Q&A Maker. We're in the process now of leveraging it as its own feature, just because it's so popular. But Q&A Maker is an awesome thing that we've also assisted that team on with some UX, right? And that basically, for people that don't know, Q&A Maker is a way to very quickly build a bot by basically importing or otherwise creating a Q&A. And then the system, the deep neural net model, understands how to expand on we call it queries. It's the question in the Q&A, right? And so you can quickly build a bot just by using that. And they call that Q&A Maker.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's cool to see like these building blocks like in Lewis and in Q&A Maker. And, at least for like the time being, it seems like a lot of these bots that workplaces are adopting, or even on the consumer side, have been very task driven. And I like how you're sort of hinting at the fact of seeing more, to your point, sort of like more intimate conversations with end users. And I think, the work that Microsoft Research has done with Xiao Ice sort of shows like what the peak of that could sort of look like as we begin to merge these two components together. And I find that incredibly fascinating. But I also want to go back in time a little bit too, in regards to fundamentals and, just what does the specialization look like to be in your role? So I want to ask you a question about, since your background is in writing, have you learned like any writing principles that, all the way back to Theater Babylon, when you were working there, that you sort of still hung on to as you sort of work today in the job that you have now?
Well, first of all, kudos to you for pulling Theater Babylon out of that. That was a long time ago. That was a small theater in Seattle that I was involved in, and yeah. So what we did in those days was we just pumped out plays, and audiences got them in front of audiences, and we were just trying to develop our skills, right? And so what was great about that was a lot of the way that we look at, I'm so unprepared. I can't believe that this connection I'm making right now between what we did in theater, in those days, the fringe theater around Seattle, was we were really trying to get in touch with what the audience responded to. If you think about the Marx Brothers, they did it in the Catskills. All those movies you see, they already rehearsed all those jokes, and they would tweak them just really, really gingerly just to see what would get the most response, right? So that's a great model to follow. You're not being manipulative. You're not compromising your creative impulses. You're actually just listening. You're realizing there's a connection there to an audience that I believe you're responsible for. You can go off and do your own thing, but if nobody's responding to it, you're not really being driven by trying to connect with a human being. So flash forward to what we do with UX. That's exactly it. If you think about design thinking, the first step of design thinking is empathy, they call it. And it's basically just getting out there and figuring out what the customer needs so that you can respond to that. And so even in the funny thing is, then you flash forward to the Cortana work, the way that worked for us was we did the whole product, but the part that we became well known for was the part that we called chit chat. I think other people like Google calls it small talk. And it's essentially, and that's essentially what that personality chat, those personalities that I spoke about the bot framework are all about. It's if people go outside your domain. With Cortana, it was the task-driven productivity assistant, right? But if people are asking questions, you can choose that are outside of that, like what's your favorite color? What do you think of Donald Trump? All these questions that people are asking, maybe kicking the tires, but really trying to figure out who that entity is. You can choose to answer that or not. We chose to answer that. But what was interesting was, we would get this big mass of query data. We didn't know who was saying it. We just knew that people were saying, like a great number of people a few years back were saying, what do you think of Donald Trump, right? For obvious reasons. And so what we do is we just make, we'd have to prioritize like anything. And we would address these questions. But what occurred to us is the starting point was the customer. The customer had to ask the question for us to know to respond to it. Right? It's a very slow process, but eventually we all became enamored of the fact that we're working on this together with the customer. They're the ones with the ideas, and then we, in true, like the principle of how search works, which is what a lot of this technology grew out of. They have an intent that they want answered, and then you try to answer that intent. Well, these conversational experiences, we believe, are no different. Initially, I thought, no, why would we tell me a joke? We're not a joke telling machine. And then the wiser people said, because they're asking for it. That's what they want. And of course, we don't give them everything, right? There's a line that you draw, particularly around ethical challenges. But you get very good at really understanding what people want to say. So that kind of harkens back to listening to your audience. What's their sweet spot, right? How can you connect with them in the best possible way? And that, of course, that's true about just UX writing as well. So yeah, that's funny. I hadn't thought about that connection.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a great parallel because, I think it also relates to one of your quotes that I read that you wrote. You said, we need more people paying attention to the question of what it means to be human. And I almost feel like in theater, that's really what it's about. And then applying those concepts back to a conversational experience, and just over sort of that iterative process of building out Cortana and saying, oh, people want to hear about jokes. Right. And then people want to ask these questions here. So, I think across UX or across writing, I think what you're saying is that, really empathizing and understanding your audience is a core tenet of building good conversational experiences.
It definitely is. And if you think about it from a brand perspective, that's exactly what it is. It's like marketing wants to. My dad had a saying. He was in business. He used to say, "Find out what they want and give them plenty of it," which I love that saying. It's not, and I used to resist it creatively, but
Yeah,
in some way, that's what we were doing. We were trying to find out what they wanted in any given moment. Back in my theater and days, and in film, it's a lot harder. That's why I was drawn to theater, because you could have much more rapid back and forth. Um, and then just basic what does your customer want? That's a classic business thing, and it works creatively as well. In fact, it's very fulfilling when you've landed that. When you've answered that intent through a conversational experience and landed it well, it's like high fives all around. Yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah.
for, all of the business owners and stakeholders that are watching this live stream right now who are, thinking about, or maybe they already have deployed, a workplace chatbot in something like Microsoft Teams using bot framework. When it comes to conversation design, like what's the methodology, you guys operate off of? Like, what would you suggest to someone that's building a chatbot? Like, what does conversation design look like from a process standpoint?
Okay. So there's kind of two areas to think about this. Right now, we'll get someday we'll get to a place where the systems are so smart that conversational design, as we think of it, voice design is what we call it at Microsoft, there'll always be a need for human beings in my future, from what I can see. But the tools are going to get better and better, and the models are going to get smarter and smarter and smarter, that this conversation generation is not going to be such a challenge. Right now, it's all just about mimicry. If you think about it, a model that sounds intelligent, you brought up Zhao Ice, it sounds intelligent. It just knows what it devises a series of responses and then applies a confidence level, and the highest confidence level wins. And it's just trying to figure out, based on conversations that it has observed, what is a logical or the best response, right? It doesn't know what it's saying. And so it can't make associations. There's context power, and there's things that we're going to get ahead of, so that it appears that it knows these things, but it's just really smart about creating the illusion of it, in my opinion. But so my point there is the tools are going to get better and better. They're not there yet. So what we have is this voice design expertise, which is really trying to figure out how to structure the language the way that people speak. You have to get ahead of that. So that's one part of it. And then it's really the part that I was in was more of the design of the feeling of the experience. I mean, that they both kind of are like this, if you think about it. But our focus was on the designing of the personality and what was the language that grew out of that design, right? So really what's interesting is, in conversational experiences, let's just say bots, the writer is really critical to that experience, because they understand how people speak. They understand the words that people are going to use and how to make it feel human, which is the reason that we're going down that path. So I guess the way that we approach it is those two paths, but ultimately what we're trying to do is to create it's all based in this desire to have a natural language-based interaction model, right? And so we want that to feel as human as it can be, without putting it out there, without duping people into thinking you're human, So anyways. Is
Yeah,
that,
no, absolutely.
or do you have, is there something you want to know more about?
Yeah, so I would love to. So, like, I see conversation design as this intersection between, traditional user experience and, human computer interaction sort of methodology, at the crossroads of copywriting, script writing, UX writing. So, from like a practical standpoint, I think a lot of people, when they hear that, it almost seems like something super complex or complicated, right? So how would like someone, maybe like a business owner or, just someone in a department that's thinking about bots, how should they be thinking about, just creating a simple bot
Yeah,
from
yeah.
like a conversation design standpoint?
That's probably the best question you could ask, because I've answered this within Microsoft, outside of Microsoft, a lot. And the first point you need to ask is the conversational experience going to enhance your customer experience in some way? So a good example is, we used to always talk about the pizza bot as a personality, right? But I have a pizza app for my local pizzeria on my phone that's so fast that conversation would slow it down. So there's no need to create a bot unless you have it for another reason, like maybe you're trying to drive a real personality play with your brand, and that voice interaction is going to play a key part of that. Then maybe it's worth going the extra mile while also offering that more intuitive, quick experience. So that's the first question you need to ask. And then the other thing to keep in mind is, the smaller the domain you have, the more successful it's going to be. If you think about like these agents like Siri, Cortana, all these, the domains are huge, and it's almost impossible to execute on. But the one that I like to use is, when explaining the personality chat product, is, if you're a hot dog salesman at a stadium, let's say, and you want to create a conversational bot experience, then you're required to know like everything about hot dogs, everything about chips or fries or whatever, everything about mustard and ketchup and all that. And that's your responsibility. But you can see that hot dog vendor has a small domain. It's hot dogs and snacks, right? You start expanding, like you think about some of like Walmart or let's say REI, right? They have tons of products you are responsible to know about. And people come to the experience expecting it to know what a human knows. So that's why I always think, yeah, make sure your domain isn't too vast. If you want to take that on, more power to you. Just know it's going to be a resource expense, because you're going to have to really dig deep into that. And then the third part that is really it's a huge challenge for people to really get their heads around, is everybody tends to think, I'm going to create a chatbot and we're going to launch it. Boom, there it goes. The launch of the chatbot is only the beginning. Because if you think about what we did with Cortana, and I said we aggregated all this data, we just kept rinse and repeating, and that would just fill out that experience to more and more detail. And that detail provided that satisfying experience and kept people coming back. It's really an investment in your future. It's a kind of like when social came out and everybody wanted to get into social as a channel for marketing. Just think of conversation as a new channel for marketing, right? Because its possibilities for companies are greater than anything that we've seen before. But it takes investment. When social first came, it was kind of like, the first rule of social is, once you let that genie out of the bottle, you got to keep going. You got to keep going down that path. Now it's kind of, everybody knows that and everybody's okay with that. That's just something you invest in. But back then it was kind of like, what do you mean? Don't we just throw up a Facebook page and that's it? No, you've got a conversation. You started a conversation, and that conversation is not going to end. Similarly, you got to look at it like the conversational experiences with the same kind of investment. It's only going to get better, and it needs to get better through investment after launch.
Absolutely. So 3 points here. The first one, you said, step back and just ask yourself, does this solution even need a conversational experience? And I think this is probably true for any emerging technology. People see shiny object, let's go build this thing because it looks cool. Yeah. And I think now, provided it seems like conversational AI has, grown more in adoption over the past 5 years, I think people are starting to sort of take that approach, which is great. And then the second thing you said is, and I think it's probably worthwhile to make the delineation between, virtual assistants like Alexa or Cortana or Google Assistant, which, those knowledge bases are far more expansive in comparison to something that, an enterprise might deploy for their, employees. And so you're saying, if an organization is going to deploy a conversational experience, ensure that they have a good grasp of what that focus scope looks like. So you could sort of keep things within the, bowling, bumpers, so to speak, right? Yeah. And then the third thing, which I think is a great point, which I think often gets forgotten, is you can't just deploy these things and expect it's going to be able to be 100%. So there is this significant optimization and iterative process, that investment from both monetary investment by an organization, but also from a training and just building competency around being able to iterate on those experiences. I think those are all great points there.
The one thing too about that domain piece that you articulated, I think better than I did, just about think of the scope of it, is I've seen a lot of excellent bot development where they do keep the domain small by just going into certain areas of their business. And also you got to think of it as far as like think of finance. There's some finance bots out there. How much am I going to trust a bot to know everything about my finances, right? So you got to pick those trust paths. The most trustworthy paths is a good starting point, and kind of learn what your customers' expectations around that conversational experience are. Yeah, that's really well articulated, Chad.
Oh, likewise. No, I think that's a great point. Because I guess that's the thing with like new technologies and experiences. You have to like find those use cases where end users are going to be amenable enough to want to try them out.
That's right.
You don't want to like go to someone and say, let's try and process all the information for your surgery, right? It's like, do I
Yeah,
really trust the bot to do that?
yeah.
Maybe, right? Perhaps.
Perhaps someday, but
Right.
right now I don't think the culture is ready for that. They might be willing to give
Yeah.
you my name, my address, my Primera card number, but I'm gonna want to talk to a human about more important stuff. That could change over time. It probably will. In fact, as we get more comfortable with these. Another thing to keep in mind that popped into my head when you were speaking is the tools are getting better and better and better. We have some tools. Power AI is something that's an offering through the Azure services, and it's the whole point is to create like almost plug and play opportunities for people that aren't developers, right? To put the tools into people's hands that don't have this deep expertise and don't need to know how to read or write code. So the tools are going to get better and better, and the models, the AI models are going to get smarter and more effective as time goes on. So take everything I'm saying as a snapshot in time, because it's all going to change rapidly. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's actually a good segue if we're talking about, the, I guess, current roadmap of where we sort of see Microsoft converging, number of product lines around conversational AI. So when we look at something like Microsoft Teams, we're now seeing this like added, focus around making it easy to deploy chatbots, right? Whether that's from Composure with Bot Framework, Composer, to Power Virtual Agents, to DataFlex, which it sounds like they're now changing the brand name around that, no code editor. And now we're finally beginning to see, Cortana getting sort of integrated back into some of these solutions, because I think it was last year or the year before, some of Cortana's features have been getting deprecated, but now they just got relaunched inside of Teams. So from what you can publicly reveal, like, what is that sort of roadmap that you see Microsoft going on when it comes to conversational AI?
So I can't really speak to the Cortana world because I'm not in it as much anymore. My old cronies are still there, but you'd have to ask them questions specific around that product. When we think about conversation at a high level, I would speak towards where Microsoft will invest. We've got our eye on those opportunities, right? Because the truth is, it's just going to head in that direction. It's certainly not heading as quickly in the direction that we thought it was 5 years ago. We thought it was going to transform design. Quit your visual design path and go into vocal design or voice design or speech design, whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, like Adobe did this great study a couple of years ago, and it still resonates because the thing that people don't understand is Cortana has, people get surprised, but Cortana ships with Windows. Windows has hit 1 billion users. So the reach for Cortana is huge. So the engagement we have, the numbers of engagement is bigger than some of the competitors. So we're still investing there for obvious reasons, right? But the interesting thing is, and we had a speaker effort was largely, small effort, largely a small effort, largely because we wanted to understand that space. And what I'm talking about is just speaker with no visual. It's a very different approach to all of this. But what Adobe did was when they were looking into voice, interaction for their products, they did a lot of research. And one of the pieces of research that popped for me was, and this was a couple years ago, the idea that those people with speakers in their homes at that time, I think it was just primarily Google and Alexa, with that kind of speaker presence. Those people with speakers in their home were 4 times more likely to engage with an assistant on their PC. That's the words they were using. Now, I don't know if that included non-PC products, but that was the words that they used. 4 times more likely. And you can just see as the incredible impact that people becoming more comfortable with using their voice, as hiccupy as it is, and we got to get ahead of that as an industry. But that's going to transform people's willingness to talk into their PCs just generally. There used to be a lot of people that were nervous about doing that. They felt uncomfortable and awkward. Of course, we're used to the mouse and we're used to the keyboard. But as we, in practice, in our lives, do more of this voice interaction, it's going to expand. So Microsoft's aware of that. We have a lot of smart people working at Microsoft. And so we look for opportunities where that's going to start to pop. The way I see it is what is the opportunity moves away from the deep investment. As you said, the difference between an agent and a bot is something that we make, and it's important to keep in mind, because there's going to be some agents out there and people are going to develop those. They're driven. The idea is it's engaging with personal information so that it can do things on behalf of you. Now, bots, we don't want every bot to have our personal information, so that the roles will be defined possibly in that way. But what we're going to see a lot more of is bots transforming into just engagement with intelligent systems, right? Like a product like Word. We might be able to speak to Word. We just launched dictation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first step into that. It may seem like, oh yeah, it's just, it's typing as I'm speaking, but it opened up the door towards an interaction that people become more comfortable with, where then we can start popping these ideas. And it may be on the coattails of Cortana. It may be identified as Cortana. It may be just the system itself responding to your vocal commands. So I see a lot of opportunity in the future, but it's dependent upon, the customer base wanting to speak in any given environment. And then it goes beyond speech too. We're talking about speech, but it also extends into gesture and gaze if we allow the camera to be on, that kind of stuff. Signals, we call them signals, picking up signals.
Definitely, yeah. It's super interesting because I feel like a lot of these different principles, harken back to some of the early work in, human-computer interaction and the thinking about, affordances and people knowing that they can actually interact with these solutions and computer systems in specific ways. Since Microsoft is a very, workplace, at least for the business world, workplace sort of focused company, what are the implications you see for taking conversational AI into the workplace, especially since we've been seeing a lot of attention around Teams and, even the basic Cortana functionality that was just released on Teams? Like, what are the implications you see around the workplace?
Well, again, you have to go back to that rule number 1. You got to see if it's a better interaction model. It jumps back to basic design. In some ways, if you think about Teams, you're talking about Teams a lot, which is great because it's a product that I use 24/7, pretty much. Actually, that's not accurate. I don't work 24 hours a day or 7 days a week. But we're on Teams a lot, of course, working remotely. Everybody is using either Zoom or Teams or some other kind of way to interact. But it's a communication channel. So I'm using my voice through this channel right now. So we're used to that. So Teams seems like a great opportunity to open up that door where we could, we worked on Cortana for Skype back in the day. And the idea was that Cortana, or the system, can be smart enough to pay attention. And I could be talking with you, Chad, and then I could say, oh, hey, make a note of that, and then it'll be locked away. So it's that kind of opportunity that exists in these communication channels where we're already using our voices. And then again, to repeat what I said before, that'll create habits, that'll create certain levels of expectation on how a system's going to work. And then we're listening to our customer, so we're going to respond to where they're going. So Teams is an excellent opportunity for Microsoft to really start opening up some of those doors.
Definitely. And I also like the point, you were talking about, gesture integration, because I was watching one of Microsoft's the recent partner summit. And in the presentation, they were beginning to mention, ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence and ambient computing. So I think for a lot of people that sort of see those buzzwords as sort of sci-fi, representations of what we saw in all these great movies, I think it's getting here a lot sooner than we're anticipating. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff for us in store here.
Yeah.
That being said, before we got on here, we were also sort of talking about, a mutual acquaintance, Deborah Harrison, and some of the work she's doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion around conversational AI. And I know you're working on some of that work as well. So I was wondering if you could sort of speak to that, and how are you guys incorporating those principles or thinking in responses when people talk to Cortana or, other digital assistants within the Microsoft space?
So so let me just be clear. Deborah's more than just an acquaintance. She's a friend, and she's been on my team since the early days of Cortana. She's now the course that I expressed that I've been on is her course as well. We've been on this journey together as colleagues, and so I'm going to say things that hopefully you'll have her on sometime, and she can really dive down into some of the details, because it's fascinating work. It's really challenging work. And effectively what it is there's what we've developed is expertise to be able to recognize things and also know how best to respond. So the inclusive language work is really a culmination of years of listening to people and what they're saying. It started with, if I give a little history, and I'll speak to what I kind of had this epiphany of why certain people are better at this work than others. And it's just a model that I discovered. It doesn't mean that it's exclusive of anybody, but it just shows the pattern of thought that I went through. And that was when I started with Cortana, I thought, okay, we're going to be working in dialogue. I know some playwrights. I know some screenwriters. I'm going to get these people that are sharp with that. Oh, and we've been given the keys to designing Cortana's personality, which is pretty much exactly like developing a character for a story, right? You have to understand the details. You want to know how that character is going to respond in any given moment. So I really leaned into the artistic side of the writing discipline. And I had this wonderful group of people that were just really funny, and we'd laugh so hard in these editorial meetings. And what we realized, though, is, as I put it sometimes, it wasn't all fun and games, because people were saying horrendous things into the system. Whether they meant it or didn't wasn't ours to worry about. We couldn't know. We didn't have that information. We didn't know about the people that were saying these things. We weren't given that, but we had to respond. And we worked hard at figuring out sensitive areas, how to respond to abuse, how to acknowledge people in moments of exposing secrets about themselves. These are all things where you start to realize the UX is becoming less static and needs to be responsive on intimate levels, which continues to this day. And I looked around and I thought, man, these folks are great at this. Because what it came was, though we loved the fun stuff, we were invigorated by taking on these deeper challenges. It really had meaning. And so when I speak to it, I always say an example is on this spectrum of writing, and this again is just a model. It doesn't mean that tech writers aren't any better at this or any worse at this than we are. But if you're going to look to go after a group of people, I always say, when I was doing copywriting in my career at one point, I was my measure of success was getting people to do a thing, right? Put something in the click, 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 click through, CTR, CTR, CTR. And I would be rewarded accordingly, right? If I was successful with the language I was using to get people to do things. If you think about the other end of the spectrum, where the real kind of ethereal world of the poet lives, their success metrics are based upon their ability to connect to a human being, right? They're not making money. Nobody's checking out if people are clicking through words in their poems. They're trying to connect to humans through their own personal experience and listening to other humans' experiences and relating and trying to reach people on a universal level. And I always say that is a great starting point if you're going to try to deal with these deep problems that people have. Flash forward, now we have this group of people. Some come from journalism, some come from a technical writing background as well. But they're very, very skilled at listening to what the context is and what it could possibly be. And so we go through these exercises with this huge database that we call the Inclusive Language Database. And we try to figure out, like, what the best way to approach these tricky areas are. And at the same time, like, you get into areas where there's no expertise. Microsoft can never tell people what they can and can't say. Microsoft Editor is a product that's out there. It's one that Deborah's team is really supporting deeply. It launched earlier in the year. It's huge. It's like think about it. It started as spell check, and then we saw grammar check. But now there's all these other boxes you can check, and one of them is inclusive language that'll call out if you're maybe using a term that might be insensitive and you're not quite aware of that, right? So we have to do all that work to understand what that is and understand that language is fluid. It's never static. And we're going to, as I was saying to my leadership just yesterday, this is a long-term investment. You can't stop. It's like that social thing that I said, once you start that conversation, same thing. Once you go down this path of really trying to help people with language, it's just never going to stop. So it's also that understanding of the fluidity of language that we're getting into, and doing that on behalf of customers, right? If you think about it, like I spoke earlier about that strategy around how do you respond to abusive behavior? Well, here's a strategy that we found works, and you can apply it in your business. Same with this inclusive language piece that we're working on. And Deborah can go into so much more detail around what the actual work is. It's a lot of work, but it's super rewarding because you realize in the end, you're actually having a positive impact on the world by helping people in these ways. And inclusive language isn't just about racial terms, it certainly is, but it's also about how we speak about people with disabilities, or how we speak about people that are just different than us in some way, right? Yeah.
No, that's incredible. I think it's groundbreaking work, because I think the really awesome part is that, the principles that you guys are uncovering, sort of transcend just conversational AI, and it can be applied to other product lines and other solutions that are customer facing, and I think as we make this leap to, as they say, the fourth industrial revolution, where we're beginning to see this merge between humans and computing systems in our lives, I think it's just an imperative, right? To get to that point where we're building experiences that are just not only good experiences for some people, but great experiences for everyone. So I think that's incredible work. So I know we only have 10 minutes left here, but I wanted to also ask about, and I know you sort of hinted about it a little bit, so if I'm coming from the arts, if I'm coming from, a place that hasn't traditionally been an area where a lot of technical people are from, how do I make that jump? If I'm a writer, if I'm a, copywriter or a script writer, how do I make that jump into tech?
First, you're going to have to be sure you want to get into tech, because even though I speak of poets and playwrights, each one of those playwrights and screenwriters loves tech. They're techie people, right? Whether it's, I love my iPhone, I love my PC, or, man, I pulled my PC apart last night and look what I found, kind of thing. Any range of spectrum on the teams that I've had over the years. But their core fundamental connection is reaching people through words. It's a decision that people make. So you have to decide whether you want to, and also I have to be frank with those of you that aren't in tech. It's an excitingly fast-paced, relentless world. It's just going a mile a minute. So you also have to be kind of a distance runner at heart in what you do, and be willing to build barriers so that you can also have a personal life, right? It's important for all of us to do that, of course. Then, as far as after you've thought, yeah, that's what I want to do, some paths in are just pay attention to design and UX writing roles, because sometimes they'll be in, bucketed together. A lot of times at Microsoft currently, there's the different experiences of how writers engage. In my world, we have big teams of writers, and we go out and we partner with our design partners, our engineering partners, and that's how we do our work. Then in other areas of the company, there will be a design team that includes a UX writer, and they're just part of the design team. So that's why you want to pay attention to both. It could be called content designer. It could be called a UX writer, any number of things. So you'll want to go onto job sites and look for that kind of thing. A good path in is consider contractor work, because there's a lot of opportunity for contractors to write for everything from the major corporations to startups. And that's how you can get your experience. And it's fun. Startups are fun. Big companies are fun if you get to do the work that you want to do, right? So don't think, don't think there's a priority over one or the other. Just look for the opportunity that sounds right and fulfilling to you. And then don't be against, and then that can be a path in. That's certainly a way to get your, dip your toe in the pool, and also not only, get expertise, but see if it's really what you're interested in doing. And then also, don't be afraid of pursuing, like I'm seeing a lot of writers coming through now that have completed a program here at the University of Washington in human-centered design. And they can still focus on writing, but they go through this program. And I think there's a certificate program here, but there's also a master's program. So don't be gun shy around that possibility. That also kind of pricks up our ears. And then the other thing is, build a portfolio of your writing. And more, it's like, don't worry if you don't have technical writing in your portfolio. Be proud and forthcoming with your creative work, because that speaks volumes to who you are as a writer and your ability, your mastery of the English language. If you're going to be working in the U.S. in English, we call it the English U.S. market, or if or not, or mastery of some cultural style of speaking, right? Be proud and forthcoming about that, and speak proudly about it. A lot of times I see writers go, "Really, you want to know what my plays are? Because I got a dozen of them." I'm like, bring them on, bring me your plays. That's what's interesting to me, So and I, admittedly, I really lean into the creative side. Not all hiring managers or companies are going to be as enthusiastic about that as I am, but you should be. You as a writer should be. So yeah.
No, that's great. So for any company watching the live stream right now, if you guys are looking to build voice user interfaces or chatbots, make sure you're looking at writers, because you definitely need them to help build out those experiences. So one question I always ask, my last question of the live stream, I always ask all my guests is, since we're just sort of in this field that's emerging, and there's new things happening, and there's unknowns, and there's uncertainty, at the end of the day, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you inspired?
Honestly, this is going to sound corny maybe, or it's going to sound like it's scripted, but it's the truth is, it was something I discovered in all this work, this conversational work. I speak a lot to, I want to be mindful of time and not go off on some long piece, but essentially it's the fact that it goes back to what it means to be human. That's the thing that I think a lot about, particularly as AI starts to take over parts of our lives and we willingly hand it over. It's really about our chance, our opportunity to connect with human beings. And we do it through language, and we do it through conversational opportunities. And we're able to assist. Like I said, when I talk about inclusive design, we're not going to tell you what to say, but we can help you understand things that you may not even be aware of. Believe me, I've learned a ton doing that I didn't know through this work. And that's what's exciting to me, is that we can really be part of the conversation around responsible design and development. We want to be responsible to people. It's a as you know, you probably read about it in the paper and you see Satya Nadella saying that, our CEO, but it really is a vibrant pulse and something that drives the people inside my company and the people on my team, is the chance to have not only a positive impact, but really get ahead of this need for us to be responsible, because the impact of what we're doing is huge. So that's what drives me. That's what excites me. That's the thing I like to talk about over a beer sometime with people, that kind of thing. So
Absolutely. No, I love it. I mean, I think there's just so much exciting things to do, but at the same time, to your point, it's really comes back to how do we sort of understand people through technology and then make sure we're creating these really good experiences that people really enjoy. So I love that. So Jonathan, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the live stream today. We will definitely get Deborah on next time. I'm definitely going to ask her these questions as well. And I'm looking forward to it. And we'll definitely have to have you back on next time.
I would love it. We could talk about anything. We could talk about anything.
Cool.
Thank you for this opportunity, Chad. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jonathan, have a great day. Take care, everyone.
You too. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.